It's time for another book talk video. It's Magical Monday. Today I'm going to talk about the fantasy trilogy by Brandon Sanderson, known as the Mistborn trilogy. I highly encourage you to read these books. For the first book, it's called The Final Empire, but many covers just say Mistborn on it, or Mistborn is really big on the cover, and then it says The Final Empire kind of small. I gave the first book 4 out of 5 stars. That's how much I like it. But I didn't originally have that feeling, and I'll get into that story. I followed that up with book 2 and 3 both being 5 out of 5 stars because it got better. I felt like the story and the universe of it got much better. For those of you who don't know, Brandon Sanderson is one of the most popular fantasy writers today. These books exist as their own as a trilogy or as a continuing saga that includes more Mistborn books that take place after them and additional stories that have been written to supplement them, including a prequel, as well as being a part of the greater universe of Brandon Sanderson's writing that he calls the Cosmere. So you have many different ways to enjoy the books. Alright, let's get on into my discussion of them. I do want to give you the warning that when I first read Mistborn, it was from a suggestion from one of my all-time best friends who just knew that this book was a great fit for me, but I didn't know it at the time. I read about 40 pages and set it aside, and I came back to it years later. And I don't know what was wrong with me at the time. I wasn't in the mood for it. In the first 40 pages, if I recall, not as much action takes place as I wanted. There's a lot of talking, a lot of setting things up. And I should go ahead and point out as well, there's a character in this book whose name on the page looks like Kelsier, or a lot of people online pronounce it Kelsier. I don't know. I go with a French interpretation, and I pronounce it Kelsier. But I have no idea what Brandon Sanderson would say about that. I don't know how he pronounces it, and I don't know how it's pronounced in the audiobooks and that sort of thing. But I think that Kelsier really fits the character. He comes across as someone from one of those French novels like The Three Musketeers, with political intrigue, conspiracy, and all that. I do regret that I set this book aside for so many years before coming back to it. I think that really, truly, Brandon Sanderson and I would get along very well if we ever stopped to talk about fantasy books, the way he puts his plots together with his characters. I feel like he and I probably grew up reading a lot of the same comic books, maybe even reading a lot of the same role-playing games, supplemental material. I love the books, and it's very original the way that he takes mythology and religious ideas and mixes them with things that seem like Star Wars or superheroes, or right out of the pages of the Palladium Rifts role-playing game with the Cosmic Knights and the superhero powers and all of that. So I in no way mean to be disrespectful or demeaning of saying that his work is just derivative of all that, but rather he has very creatively mixed those kind of elements together in order to bring us these great stories. The main character in Mistborn is Venn, and it starts out with her being a street rat, which is the kind of story that I really like, a rogue surviving on the streets. It's a fantasy novel, but with a plot that has a heist mixed into it, and I really like that. That's right up my alley as well. And the character has to learn how to use her powers, which I really enjoy. I think that that's great. There is romance, but the romance doesn't take over the fantasy elements and the heist plot and all of that. It's more of a subtle romance, so I appreciate that. Like I'm saying, Brandon Sanderson's just checking off the list of all the great things that I love about fantasy novels. You could technically read Mistborn's first book, The Final Empire, as a book on its own, but I think that you would be left wanting to know what happens in the future to these characters if you did that. Which is why I'm doing this video for the entire trilogy, to recommend all 3 books at once, but also because it makes it easier than doing future videos in which I have to try to avoid spoilers on those other books, because the way that the characters end up with their powers and the way that that develops very much affects the future books and what they're able to accomplish. This is not the kind of story where the heroes always win, and that's also really refreshing to know that you're not guaranteed to have have good guys win their battles. There are times where characters could die. There are times where they could fail, barely survive, have to try and come up with new plans, and thus it makes it less predictable, which I also enjoy. Alright, I hope I've said enough to pique your interest and make you want to pick up the book. And like I was saying, I beg of you, give it more than 40 pages. I think once you get past 40 pages, you will really be hooked. The action will start picking up, and you'll feel the intrigue more beyond that point. I think I've said enough. Every day is a good day for a book talk. Peace.